Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Get myself behind the desk here. Thank you, everyone, for coming for our AOD Partnership Meeting today. We're very excited to be welcoming Julia Sherman in for our meeting. She's looked at as the state expert in alcohol policy, so we're just really excited to have her here to be able to enlighten us as part of our Communities Talk Town Hall meetings efforts. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about kind of why we need to talk about alcohol in just a minute, but before that I just want to do kind of a little bit of housekeeping notes. As I mentioned, the slides, both the ones that I will be presenting on as well as Julia's, are over on that table over there. Pretty much everything on the right side of the pens is the handouts that you would want to pick up. Additionally, we have a little bit of a different evaluation. It's part of this event as part of our partnership with the federal government. SAMHSA actually helped support us in this today. So the evaluation's a little bit longer than probably what you're used to, but there's really not that much, believe it or not. It's just a lot, there's a lot of writing in it. So just please make sure you fill these out. You can leave them at your spots, or we can just kind of start a pile on one of the tables. Also, if you need CEU credits, there are CEU registration forms over there. That's an easy way just to get some credit back. For today, you get one CEU. So fill those out, and I will turn those into our continuing education department. Just a reminder that this meeting will be recorded for our YouTube channel. There is little reminder cards of what that channel looks like, or where the link for that channel. All of our meetings are recorded and posted on there, unless we have a documentary showing, for example, something like that that we won't end up recording. One thing that is very exciting that will be ending up on our YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of tomorrow, is our final Marijuana and Youth series presenter, Dr. Zion Harris from Harvard and Children's Hospital out in Boston. We actually recorded her Marijuana in the Teen Brain session that she did for us on May 6th. So that will be posted thanks to NTC who recorded it. We'll be posting it on our YouTube channel for people that want to receive the 4 CEUs that were part of it, or 3 CEUs, excuse me, that were part of that session. NTC is going to be working out how you can register and pay for those CEU credits, but you are able to access it for future use. A couple of upcoming events, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of our partners. If you have any partner events or partner updates, just a reminder, I think looking around the room, most of you do get our weekly update, the e-newsletter we send out. If you don't, with signing up today, we'll make sure that you get put on that list. But just some of the things that are coming up, just to kind of highlight in no particular order, because they're kind of smattered all over this. Instead of doing a traditional announcement slideshow, I just did this. All this stuff is in our weekly update as well, which you can access through our Facebook page too. But there's a lot of trainings coming up just to highlight training opportunities. There's a substance abuse prevention skills training coming up in Rothschild. It's actually a 4-day training that will be June 25th through the 28th. The cost is free, I want to say, and it's something that if you're working towards your prevention specialist certificate, you can actually go through this, and it's part of it. There's a number of recovery coaching trainings coming up, one in Merrill, as well as one down in Rapids. So there's those opportunities for the people that are interested in participating in Rise Up. There's a Rise Up event that's going to be a mural dedication ceremony at Wausau on June 28th. So all the community paint days are past, but there is the opportunity to participate in that way. A couple other trainings to point out on the reverse, or however you're looking at it, the Overcoming Addiction series. The first sessions were very successful in May. We're going to have some coming up in July and August. In July, there will be a judge coming up from Dane County, who's part of their treatment courts down there. He's going to be talking about the need to understand the impacts that things like adverse childhood experiences have had on families and how they work through the justice system to recognize that. So we're going to be updating this flyer, but that's just a teaser. So mark that on your calendar. It's available. We're going to have the same sessions in July 18th here in Wausau, July 19th in Rhinelander. And then the last session, the Taking Care of Ourselves session, I'm very excited. This is just being announced now. Jeff Van Vonderen will be back. So if you haven't heard Jeff Van Vonderen from the A&E's intervention, he will be back to be part of those sessions that day. So he's just going to be one of the speakers for it. We're also going to be doing an evening session on August 15th. We're just finalizing the details. So if you missed it, or if you want to come hear him again, talking about, how do we help those with addictions without enabling. That opportunity is out there. And the last thing to point out as far as upcoming events from my part is Wisconsin is hosting the National DEC Conference, or Drug Endangered Children Conference. It'll be down in La Crosse. There is scholarships available from the hotel. Cost of registration is $175 for the 3-day event. So it's a good opportunity to hear national level speakers right here in the state. So if you have the opportunity to go, I would definitely recommend it, and I will see you there. And if you're looking for an easy way to give to AOD Partnership and you shop, like myself, Amazon Smile is a really good way to give back to any nonprofit that you are passionate about or passionate for. You can actually find them through Amazon Smile. You can search for them. AOD Partnership does have an Amazon Smile account as a local nonprofit. So that is an opportunity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Amanda. Can you talk about the Restoring the Calm?
Sure. So United Way's Partnership for Youth is holding a professional development day. So for any of you or coworkers that you may have who work with youth, this is a really great opportunity for free training. It's a full day, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., includes lunch. The featured speaker this year is Heather Forbes. She is the owner of the Beyond Consequences Institute and has authored numerous books on trauma-informed care, particularly in relation to youth who've experienced trauma. Some staff from Wausau School District and DC Everett School District have heard her present before and said she is fantastic. So they highly recommend her. So I hope any of you who are interested are able to attend. It's August 14th at DC Everett Middle School, and the registration link is on this email, and it has been included in the weekly updates as well.
Thank you. And Jenna, if you could talk a little bit about the tobacco resources that you brought to share, and then the monies that are available.
Yes, so there's a flyer on the table if anybody's interested in teen resources in terms of quitting for e-cigarette addiction, and then Marshfield Clinic Health System is offering $500 stipends to community organizations that want to mobilize discussion and efforts around the e-cigarette issue with teens. So if you want more information about that, you can talk to me after the meeting, but the website is Marshfield Clinic Health System Community Investments. And I think their requirements for that is pretty loose, so it's actually a really good opportunity locally.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other partner updates that anybody would like to share? All right. So with that, I'm just going to go back into kind of where we started today. This event is supported by SAMHSA's Communities Talk, Town Hall Initiative, which provides funding to communities to help raise awareness around underage drinking and do things to help prevent it. Because we know that alcohol is the most commonly abused drug amongst youth, and although it is illegal for people under the age of 21, 11% of all alcohol consumed in the U.S. is by those that are not legal enough or old enough to buy it. So it is a big issue. And when we look at Marathon County specifically, one thing that we do have here is our youth risk behavior survey. So there's hard copies over there if you haven't seen it. We have a high school version, a middle school version. And we ask different questions like, have you ever drank alcohol? Have you drank in the last 30 days? Have you binge drank? And gave them the definition of what that is in the last 30 days. So there's different kind of elements here that are part of this data. You also have a summary sheet of the data that's available that's posted on Marathon County Pulse, which is our innovative online data platform that really kind of consolidates all data related to Marathon County into one hub. So you have all the youth alcohol specific data right there at your fingertips. But just to highlight, according to the 2017 version, which 100% of our local high schools did participate, about 1 in 4 youth reported drinking the last 30 days. 1 in 10 reported binge drinking in the last 30 days. Nearly 1 in 5 drank before the age of 13. And one of the things that kind of scares me, enlightens me, I think a lot of times when we talk about underage drinking, people are thinking, oh, drinking and driving, right? Kids are making good decisions as far as themselves drinking and driving. About 1 in 20 reported driving after drinking. But 1 in 5 reported riding with somebody that had been drinking. So whether or not, and that's the high school data, in middle school data as well, middle school data is actually higher reporting driving with somebody that had been drinking. And that speaks to our culture, that speaks to us as adults setting good examples, because that may play a part in what that data says. When we look at middle school data specifically, we had 80% of our middle schools, so 8 out of 10 participate. 16% reported ever drinking. So this is middle school, this is 6th grade. And this is more than just a few sips, this is more than just communal wine. 1 in 10 said they had their first drink before 10. And then nearly 3 out of 4 said their parents would say it's wrong if they drink, compared to about 61% or 2/3 of high schoolers saying that. So as kids get older, the message that they're getting is it's okay that they drink. This idea that's a rite of passage. And Julia is going to talk a little bit about what is different about kids drinking today. And whenever I talk about it, I always say, it's not Boone's Farm, it's not Blatt's. This is high-octane alcohol that doesn't taste like alcohol anymore. So it's really important that we're talking about this because it is impacting our kids here locally. We need to send that message that it's unsafe for kids to drink before the age of 21, that it's unhealthy, the impacts that it can have on kids' health long-term. Brains develop until we're 25. So the earlier you mess with your brain, alter those pathways that make you feel joy, the harder it is for your brain to feel that joy without that substance. So alcohol is just one of those highly available different substances of abuse. And just the fact that it's unacceptable. We have laws in place for a purpose. We have these safeguards in place for a purpose that we just need to send that message and enforce our laws and policies accordingly. Because there's a lot of things that happen when kids drink, and like I said, I think a lot of the times, it comes to graduation, for example, we're going to do lock-ins. Kids aren't going to be out partying and driving. Driving is just one element when kids drink. There's a lot of ramifications for things around school, their future plans, their social relationships, their personal relationships, their family relationships, legal woes, getting OWIs as a minor, and they build and stack. The physical changes, not to mention just the brain, but just the impacts of heavy and frequent alcohol use has sent more and more people that you'd expect to be in their 50s and 60s to cardiac surgery now before they're even 30. So this is having a direct impact here locally, as well as just the addiction factor. Those that start drinking before the age of 15 are 5 to 7 times more likely to develop an addiction, especially when it's in their families, and just the death factor. One other thing too that I always find enlightening, probably not the right word, but is that we always think about overuse of alcohol to the point of alcohol poisoning as a kid issue. But when you look at the data, it's not actually your teens and young adults, it's your mid-30s to mid-50s. So this isn't a behavior that we all of a sudden outgrow once we hit our mid-20s. So it is something that has made a significant impact kind of across the spectrum. And when we look at kind of ways to identify if somebody may be using, have you seen mood changes? There's actually a half sheet over their resource that kind of lists some of these things out. But do they have changes of interest? Have you noticed more lying or deceptiveness or more secretiveness? Are they less likely to be able to account for time? That when it's like, you got done with work at 10, why didn't you get home until 11 and it's a 15-minute drive? Things like personality changes. They may be, teen years is one thing, but we can't dismiss behavior that inherently, whether you work with kids, whether you have kids of your own, that those personality changes are in place. And then again, those health impacts that we're seeing more and more, memory lapses, poor concentration, the bloodshot eyes, slurred speech. There's a lot of things that we can start looking for. And again, this isn't just a youth issue. I talk to businesses all the time about how do we identify kind of the impacts that alcohol and other drugs have on their businesses. But it's never too early to have those conversations. That watching the news and you see someone picked up, the 8th OWI, this person's terrible. Why did they just take his car away? Or why don't they just, lock her up? Whatever it is, we need to start the conversation of, why people are using, what leads somebody to make those decisions. How do we talk about making good decisions for you? And just, the things that we could do as a community to support existing laws, to look at changing policies, to be consistent, to send the right message that Beers for Jesus may be something that when you have your beer tent right next to your kiddie corral, what does that send? There's really I don't know very many 1-year-olds that are really excited whether or not you have a keg on tap for their birthday. So, just kind of keeping it youth focused, because we can't change behavior overnight, but we can change the culture the more that we talk about it through some sort of comprehensive type of program. So, as I said, we're just really excited to have Julie here to be part of this. Every other year there's an alcohol policy conference that's held in October. If you've never been, I would suggest it most highly because it is a great wealth of information. On the back of one of your handouts, can't remember, it has this map, so you can see it maybe a little bit easier. This was actually created for the last session, but with that, I'm going to invite Julie up. I'm kind of concluding with my comments as far as why we need to talk about it. I'll get her going. There you go.
All right.
Onward and upward.
Onward and upward.
Julia Sherman.
Thank you, Melissa. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a call out to Melissa Moore, because you have one of the most active community coalitions in the state, and just listening to that list of educational opportunities was exhausting. I can imagine how much effort goes into organizing them. So it really pays off. Here in Marathon County, you have been a leader in a lot of alcohol policy, but Marathon County is a lot more than the city of Wausau. So we need to start looking at some of the other communities there and talk about what we can do. I'm going to touch today on 2 specific issues: national advertising for alcohol and local control, because believe it or not, the 2 issues are in fact related. Now we're going to find out if I can really run this thing. Son of a gun, it worked. We didn't know how much alcohol advertising really reached children. We knew how much was being put out into the universe, but we weren't able to quantify how much alcohol advertising children were actually seeing until 2002. After that, we will be able to measure the impact of the alcohol advertising on kids by asking them how much they were drinking, whether or not they were drinking. This is very important. In the late 1990s into the early 2000s, the average age of first drink in America dropped from the young teens to below teens, 12 years and 9 months to be specific. That's not teenage drinking. So in 2002, we were able to measure for the first time how much alcohol advertising reached children. And using that data, they were able to use questions and following children through their lives to see the impact that alcohol advertising was having on children. And by 2006, we saw the first study come out of the University of Connecticut, Leslie Snyder. And in it, she found that the amount of alcohol advertising children see has an impact on when they begin to drink, and if they're already drinking, how much they drink. We now have over a dozen peer-reviewed studies, just a decade later, that confirm that. And some of them are longitudinal studies that followed kids, because families are pretty mobile these days, right? And so they could see when a child lived in a community that had more alcohol advertising, they were beginning to drink younger and they drank more often, as opposed to communities that saw less. And the research has progressed to the point where what you see on the screen is why alcohol advertising matters. It's been quantified to the point that we know that a 1% increase that each additional advertisement a child sees will lead to a 1% increase in the number of drinks they consume in that month. All right? There's another way to put it. Each additional dollar of advertising above the average spent per capita will result in a 3% increase in underage drinking. So for example, if I was spending the average amount on advertising in our little media market of 100 people, and I spent $100 more, I would see a 3% increase in underage drinking. They could quantify how much misery and pain was being bought. And I just want to point out to all of you that I don't think that mouse in that Smirnoff ad, he doesn't look at all like Stuart Little, does he? No, he doesn't look at all like Stuart Little. So we were able to quantify how much alcohol advertising children see and how it is placed. We also need to think carefully about the products. In the last decade, we have seen the products taste less and less like beer, even though they are fermented malt beverages. And they have names like hard soda. Now this summer it's hard seltzer, right? Hard sparkling water, kind of an oxymoron, but it's out there. It's fruit flavored, it's sweet, it doesn't taste like beer. Often it is pre-mixed cocktails or Jell-O shots. You'll see Four Loko up there. Remember when Four Loko was pulled off the shelves? Guess what we learned? We learned Wisconsin doesn't have a way to pull alcohol products off the shelves. Some of the retailers put it on sale. That was not what the FDA had in mind, by the way. They put it back on the market. They took off the chlorine and the chlorine. And you know what they did? They heightened the alcohol content and they made the cans bigger. That also was not what a lot of parents had hoped for. So it's back on the market, but it's not the same formula that was pulled off. The caffeine's out, okay? We've also noticed distilled spirits are being handled differently now. In fact, the prices dropped, and they have flavors like birthday cake, marshmallow, peppermint candy. A lot of this flavoring probably has a lot more to do with the fact that for the first time since records have been kept, more vodka is sold in the world than whiskey. Think about that. For millennia, Scotch, bourbon, Canadian, Irish whiskeys, they were the top selling type of distilled spirit. The past 3 years, it's been vodka. And I think these flavorings have a lot to do with that. But we also have to look at the fact that you see a lot of alcohol advertising. And as you can see, much of it is very tasteful, right? You see on average 3 alcohol ads a day. Most of it they see locally. That was a real surprise to us when we found that out because we kind of assumed that it was television, right? But TV comes in second. It's actually the local advertising, and that is why it's so important to look at local advertising because we can make real difference there. If each additional ad results in an increase in underage drinking, we're hypothesizing, we haven't got enough data to prove that in fact if we can reduce the amount of advertising they see locally, we will see at least a leveling off or commensurate drop in underage drinking. We also see that TV has a lot of product placement. This is E, and as you can see, America's favorite family, the Kardashians, are drinking all the time. And yet we know that teenage girls across America are glued to this, and in fact, that the distilled spirits and the vintners who create that champagne, they pay for these product placements. They know these are influencers, and it's an endorsement. We also know that product placement, alcohol occurs at the movies. In fact, more than 50% of the movies that are rated G and PG-13, I think it's in the 80s, 85% of movies rated G and PG actually have people drinking in them. And that's going to be an issue too. Now, we know that our kids are going to live in the world. And they're going to see people drinking, especially if they're living in Wisconsin. But the fact is that this does have a cumulative effect. And I don't think most of us ever think about it, especially when we're sending our kids off to the movies. So who regulates alcohol advertising? Great news, the alcohol industry is regulating it themselves, right? No conflict of interest there. The 3 organizations, the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, that's known as DISCUS, the Beer Institute, pretty plain name, that's what they are, and then the Wine Institute. They all have their own separate codes, They hire their own experts to evaluate any complaints. Citizens can file a complaint with any of these codes. If they know the code exists and they can find the code, they can file a complaint, and these independent experts hired and paid by the alcohol industry will determine whether or not this complaint is valid. The system is kind of stacked against our kids. You look at these 3 ads, this one over here, that is the play school version. Play school, that's preschool stuff. Take to a Heineken ad, game day. Down here was rum chata. They did get a complaint and they voluntarily pulled it from the market. They realized that maybe Fruit Loops floating in a little rum was not the right image. This one over here, the Sky Vodka ad, this isn't the worst I've seen, but I couldn't bear myself to put the worst I've seen, although this one does allude to prostitution. And then there is Imadka, these little guys down here. Did anybody see Imadka in the stores up here? Great. Then let me tell you about Imadka, because this gives you an example of how the alcohol advertising works. I knew I'd botch it eventually. In Wisconsin, well, nationally, 5 complaints were filed against Imadka. I filed one. A colleague at the University of Wisconsin Law School, Professor Sarah Davis, filed one. The Portage County Health Department filed one. Stoughton Hospital filed one. And a parents group in Evansville, a small community down in Northern Rock County, filed one. And 9 months later, they came to the conclusion that, yes, that looks like a toy. That would be overly attractive to children. I'm sure they stayed up night trying to figure this out. I mean, clearly it's a complicated issue. And they negotiated with the guy that Stoller Imports, see them on here, to take it off the market. And then they did nothing, because none of their codes require them to share the information that they found this. So it took 9 months for them to evaluate the product, and then we're coming up on 12 months, and we're still seeing it in stores. So it started coming off the market when I called my counterpart in Illinois. She had it lucky. She called the Illinois Alcohol Beverage Control Commission and sent them a copy of the decision, and it was off the shelves in Illinois. But here in Wisconsin, public health nurses had to go to different stores and say, hey, please take it off. Hand them the decision from the Distilled Spirits Council and say, please take it off. We were seeing it a full year after we filed the complaint. What we learned is this system does not protect our children. How can you call it a complaint system or even think it's effective if you make these scholarly decisions and then keep them to yourself? The system does not protect our kids. And we're going to continue to make these complaints because we're going to prove to the federal government that this system does not protect our kids. Working with the Northeastern Area Health Education Agency, New AHAP, we're creating a guide. We've taken both the 2 codes for discus, for the distilled spirits, and for beer, and we're creating single-page summary of what to look for, how to write a complaint, and where to send it. If you'd be interested in being in the next round of tests, let Melissa know. She didn't know I was going to volunteer her for that.
I love being volunteered, Juliet.
I know you do. That's why I love coming to Wausau. So let them know, and then we'll send it to you for your comments. The first 2 rounds of tests, we showed people ads, and then they responded to those ads. Now we're ready to send this product out, our beta testers, out into the community, and let you see if you can look at a product or an advertising and see if it violates the codes. And if this product will help you, write a complaint, because we need to keep writing these complaints. The alcohol industry tells people, and by people I mean Congress, that they make these decisions, or they receive no complaints, which means they're following the codes. They aren't. But we have to prove it, and I need your help. Besides, I gotta tell you, it's kind of fun. It really is. When we look at the alcohol environment in Wisconsin, we know the 4 factors that affect the alcohol environment. And these are the factors, they're named by the World Health Organization. Now, they won't always use the 4 A's. Have you guys discussed the 4 A's up here? No. Okay. These are the elements of the alcohol environment. How available is alcohol? Right? It's pretty available in Wisconsin. How attractive it is, its marketing, its advertising, how acceptable alcohol use is, right? And then finally, how affordable. What makes Wisconsin unique and makes our role in the community so important is that unlike other states, we have control over 3 of the 4 locally. Locally. Affordability, that's largely a factor of the alcohol tax rate. And as you may have heard, we haven't raised the beer tax in this state since the year Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. It seems unlikely to be happening within the next 4 weeks as well. But the other 3, you have a significant amount of control over locally. So I'd like to take a few minutes and go through each of these and explain some of the things you can do in your community. And it's not just big communities. It's also small villages and towns and mid-sized cities. What works in Wausau will also work in Cronenweder and Merrill and Spooner, all right? These are universal principles. Now, the words aren't used the same everywhere for a couple of reasons. One, not everybody speaks English. But beyond that, they're local terms. Commonwealth countries, in the British Commonwealth, they don't say affordable. They say economically available. Okay. This 4A is like a hip pocket tool. It means if it makes alcohol less available, less attractive, less acceptable, or less affordable, it has a chance, whatever you're talking about, has a chance to improve the community alcohol environment. It works at the population level. It does things that don't do this, it doesn't mean they're bad. High school lock-in, great idea. Keep the kids away, busy that night that's kind of fraught. Great, but it won't change the alcohol environment. It doesn't mean don't do them. What it means is you need to address it also at the population level. And these are all tested. Alcohol policy is a relatively new field. It only has been around since the mid-70s. Wasn't invented in the United States. It was a function of the Finnish, English, and Canadian researchers. But we have done a great deal in this field. And there is a significant body of information that can tell us how we can improve the alcohol environment. And because we're coming in sort of not late in the game, but after the first couple innings, we skipped a lot of the failures. So now as we're getting better at this and we know what really works, we can hop on and do it, and we can do it locally. Wisconsin is different. Only 5 states have local alcohol control in the nation. Have you guys lived here most of your lives? Okay. You may not realize how different the alcohol regulation policy elsewhere is. There are a number of states where, in fact, all the alcohol policy, where bars are cited, what products are served, what hours they can be sold, is handled by 5 appointees of the governor, an alcohol beverage control board. Can you imagine what would happen if 5 white guys in Madison, appointed by the governor, any governor, was deciding where bars would be in Wausau? Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there'd be a riot, right? We wouldn't put up with this. But because most states have centrally controlled alcohol policy, a lot of the policies that came out on the national level, they didn't fit us right away. And people would say, you can't do that in Wisconsin. We couldn't do it on the state level, but we can do a lot of it locally. And that's why your community coalitions are very, very important. We also skipped some of the foundational policies. People just look at me cross-eyed when I point out we don't have a state law that requires people serving alcohol to be sober. Most other states took care of that when Prohibition was repealed. We don't have a state public impairment or public intoxication law. We also have learned that the tools that public health has used to determine readiness for other public health issues doesn't work on alcohol in Wisconsin. Since you're preventionists, I will tell you Wisconsin pretty much scores at what's called pre-contemplation, which means you really can't get much done. But the evidence proves, and this was actually published as a study in the Journal of Preventive Health, so it's real, I'm not making this up, that what pulls communities through in Wisconsin is a vigorous debate. You've had some of these vigorous debates in Wausau. You've had Lisa Rasmussen, who led the way with the sober server ordinance. I was up here for that. That was a vigorous debate. And a veto, and another vigorous debate, and another vote. Those are what brings communities along in Wisconsin. So don't let the fact that you get pushback stop you. Wisconsin, once again, we're different. We're not bad, we're just different. The other thing to look at is, in fact, local control is very agile. In states where they have statewide control, they often have to wait till a problem is out of control, or a bar is out of control, or a product is causing great problems like Four Loko, before they could act. But here, if you've got an underage drinking problem, you can act here. If another community has a different sort of problem, say adult binge drinking, they can deal with that. In truth, most communities in Wisconsin have both an adult binge drinking problem and an underage drinking problem. Underage drinking, and this is a bit off script, but I think it's important to note, underage drinking takes on new importance now since we're focusing on opiates. Only 8% of the youth who don't drink as teenagers ever try illicit drugs. Think of it this way. 92% of the kids who abstain from alcohol when they're underage ever try illicit drugs. There have been a couple articles on this in the Journal of School Health that are very persuasive. If we prevent underage drinking now, we can prevent illicit drug use later. So don't let up on underage drinking. We just can't afford to do that. Communities can address your pressing issues, and you can begin by enforcing current law. I mean, the one thing we know is there are plenty of laws on the books, right? And several of them happen to say that the minimum legal drinking age is 21. Enforce it. By and large, the police are going to be very excited about it because people tend to go into law enforcement because they like enforcing the laws. But one thing that we forget in Wisconsin is that the police can only enforce the laws the community supports. And so we need to be vocal in our support for law enforcement when they enforce that minimum legal drinking age law. Oops. Within municipal control, there's outlet density, alcohol license conditions. I'm just going to run through this list real quick. Non-commercial asset, limits on signage, enforcing the drinking age and community norms. I mean, that's quite a list right there. Let me go through them individually, though. When we look at the availability of alcohol in Wisconsin, we're talking about two things. I mean, does anybody really think it's hard to find a place where you can either purchase alcohol or sit down and have a drink? No, it isn't. And we have learned that an overconcentration of alcohol outlets will result in a higher rate of alcohol-related crime and disorder, even if all the licensees obey the law. The picture up there, that's that artist rendering from the UW of State Street in Madison, which is the poster child for overconcentration of alcohol outlets. And even if all the licensees there obey the law, they're going to have higher rates of alcohol-related crime and disorder because there's just too many places selling and serving alcohol. We're encouraging people, communities to adopt guidelines. Now, you've gone a long way on that in Wausau, but as I said, there are a lot of other communities in this county that have not adopted guidelines, and there's a very simple reason you need to do it. If you don't have some picture guidelines that lead you to, if you don't have a picture of where you want your community alcohol environment to go, it makes it hard to select applicants that will get you there. If you don't have guidelines that help guide your decision, you will be tempted. And I sat on a city council, so I know this. You decide the application based on what's in front of you, right? But in fact, that bar, that licensee, that restaurant, it's not going to operate in a vacuum. It's going to operate in a neighborhood and in a community. And you need to award that license. An alcohol license application can be denied for any reason unless that reason is arbitrary. We don't award licenses on days it's raining. Or discriminatory. We're not giving a license to short women, Julia. That would be discriminatory. Or saying that you only want local licensees. You're not going to look at chains. That could be perceived by some people as discriminatory. You can say no because the neighborhood doesn't want it. The police don't want it. You don't have enough parking in the area. There are enough places already. That's a legitimate reason and stood up in court. You have a lot of authority, but once awarded, it can only be non-renewed, revoked, or suspended for cause. That means a violation, okay? So once you have a situation with an overconcentration of alcohol outlets, it is the dickens to dig your way out of it, which is why alcohol license applications should be reviewed and approved very carefully. We've got several sets of guidelines that some communities have looked at. I'm happy to share them. Think about it. It makes sense. Just because they haven't done it in the past doesn't mean it wouldn't serve a purpose in the future. One of the best sets I've ever seen was for a village of 3,000 people. They feel that their good quality of life is the best thing they have to offer. They want to be the best place in the county to raise a family. And they have created guidelines for alcohol licensees that reflect that they want to, in fact, have the best place to raise a family in the county. It makes a lot of sense. And that begins with the alcohol license application. It's just very basic what the state requires, but a community can ask for so much more. Now, I know Wausau does, but do the communities outside of Wausau ask for it? Many municipalities are asking for business plans. They're asking for security plans, depending on the size. They want to know what you're going to be serving, how much you're going to be charging for it. Will there be a kitchen open? Will there be live music? And also, there's one line on that application that says, what's the licensed area? Now, people used to put the address in there, 123 Main Street, which means you've licensed the whole building, or the entire golf course in many cases. But increasingly, especially in off-premise locations, they're narrowing that down. Have any of you ever been in a place that you think is a convenience store, but it's really a liquor store with gas pumps in front of it? Yeah, we've all seen them here in Wisconsin. That happened because they didn't write the licensed area very tightly. Communities are getting very good at doing that, but still not enough for doing it. We've got almost 2,000, over 1,700 different communities that can licensed places to sell and serve alcohol in Wisconsin. So in fact, we've still got a long way to go here. So licensing narrowly, that's also important. You do that on the application. And then you add alcohol license conditions. They are the greatest thing. They are like the Swiss Army knife of alcohol policy, because a license condition addresses issues that are really too small to put in ordinance. Let me give you some examples. Outdoor amplified music gets cut off at 10 o'clock at night. Places that has a beer garden or an outside patio, maybe they're in a neighborhood. Maybe parents in that neighborhood put their kids to bed before 2 a.m. Maybe, right? So knocking off the outside amplified music, that makes sense. At one urban bar that I'm aware of, they just let people smoke outside. It was kind of a club, actually, music. And people that lived in the adjacent condos were coming out next morning and sort of digging through these piles of cigarette butts. License condition, at closing, someone sweeps the sidewalk. Trash is not taken out until 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. the next morning. You can have a dress code. That changes things a lot, because dress code can also prevent gang wear, and it sets the atmosphere as well for a certain location. I've seen license conditions that are narrow, so narrow it specifies the type of music that may or may not be played there. You can't put that in ordinance, but you can put it on a license when it's being issued. And the beauty of that is that it's enforceable. Promises are not enforceable. Alcohol license conditions are enforceable. Violate that, put the license at risk. We did a survey of 45 different communities' license conditions a couple years ago. The summary is on my website. If you've got an amenity issue on a bar, a lifestyle kind of thing, a neighborhood nuisance issue, chances are good we can deal with it with a license condition. When we look at the availability of alcohol as well, we need to limit Class A as well as bars. People always think of bars, but we know that underage youth, teenagers, they're first going to try to buy alcohol at a convenience store or a drugstore or someplace like that. They're not going to go in and sit down on a bar stool and order, a burger and a beer. They get thrown out. But they might just be able to get away with buying a 6-pack of Keystone Light at a convenience store. We know. So it's very important to also keep that number down, because the more outlets you have selling, the greater the likelihood that you're going to have an underage drinking problem. You also need to look at click and collect operations. Do you folks know what I'm talking about? Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Support your semi-annual alcohol age compliance checks, okay? And adopt license conditions also for your temporary licenses, all right? Alcohol age compliance checks, they're not stings. A sting indicates there was entrapment. This is not entrapment. I would be as happy as I've ever been in my life if I caught everybody in town obeying the law. Regrettably, that rarely happens. An alcohol age compliance check, there are accepted protocols. There is a work that can be done in the coalitions that you can help support them. They work. Within 2 years, you will have a 95% plus pass rate if you conduct them twice a year. If you go more than 2 years without one, you're going to lose what's called the halo effect, okay? They also complement other enforcement options. Class A, that's where the younger teens try. Class B, that's on premises. That's where your 18, 20-year-olds will try to purchase, and that's where the fake IDs come in. State law, recent state law, limits the citations to the server. The city of La Crosse went to the appellate court for the right to sue, write a citation to the licensee, and certain special interests went to the state legislature and changed the law so only the server could be cited. But you can put a letter in their file and consider it at renewal time. If a location is consistently failing and you're consistently writing citations to the person that sells or serves alcohol, they're not getting their training. Something's rotten with the way that place is managed. We've talked about, people talk about responsible beverage server training, but research shows that the attitude of the manager is by far the most important factor. It makes sense. People do what their supervisors ask them to do. They ask them to sell with anybody with a pulse, they'll sell to anybody with a pulse. We've also started something new. Place of last drink, POLD. Did you know that we have been collecting in Wisconsin for over 20 years the location, the last location that someone was drinking before they got picked up for OWI? We've been collecting it for 20 years. And now for the last 3 in Dane County, we've been compiling it. What we look for is a pattern of over-serving. We don't look for individual incidents. What we look for is a pattern that shows over-serving. We compile this data. We don't compile driver data. We compile licensee data, the blood alcohol, the time, the date, the jurisdiction, okay? And twice a year, we give that data back to the police chiefs in the community that licensed that bar. So for example, if somebody was drinking in Wausau, but they got picked up by the Cronenwetter police, I passed the sign, so those are the 2 communities I'm going to be talking about, that the Wausau police will never know unless somebody compiles it. We have no interlinked system of records in Wisconsin so that we know in a community where how many drivers were overserved and picked up by police in the general area. We don't know that data. So we started compiling it in Dane County. Now Greene County's compiling it and Rock County's compiling it. And we're giving it back to the police departments, and they're sitting down and they're having serious discussions with the licensee. In Wausau, they found one licensee was named 21 times in a 12-month period. That was reasonable cause under the law for an undercover investigation, where they learned that the servers were drunk. See, those sober servers. In Dane County, we found a couple places that weren't quite that bad, but there were 7 and 8 occasions. Police sat down, had a serious conversation with them. And the licensees have been very receptive. It's data you can't argue with. And they can go back and say, was this nickel beer night? Some of them have gone through their personnel records and determined that one bartender was over-serving. It's data that shows a pattern. It's not picking on anybody. We have it in our communities. If any of your communities or your county was interested in doing it, we're pulling together a users group that tracks this data. I know you've been talking about your festivals up here for years. There are license conditions you can put on them. It has the same license conditions as others. I know many of you are familiar with the Alcohol, Culture, and Environment Report. We also suggested some license conditions you put on your temporary licenses. Increasingly, communities are finding one block of licenses, temporary license conditions, and just putting them on all of them. Because one, these festivals are run by volunteers. They're not professional servers. They're not professional bar managers. And so if you just make it clear up front what's expected of them, it's easier. They often think they're working for a good cause. But working for a good cause doesn't mean they get to overserve or serve underage. This just makes it clear up front. We've had a real growth in beer and wine walks in this community, throughout Wisconsin, and now they have been codified to up to 20 premises. We haven't seen license conditions put on them yet, but if you do start having a trouble with your wine or beer walks, I would certainly like to know about it. Oops, sorry there. Click and collect. I spoke of that as a retail trend a few minutes ago. That's where you order it online and then it's delivered in a parking lot, right?
Well, Wisconsin law requires that you sell face-to-face and you sell to over 21 and they can't be intoxicated, right? That's kind of a low bar. And in a parking lot in January, in the darkness, with the hats on and everything, some of this may be a little difficult to ascertain. We all kind of look alike in our hats and our gloves by the time you get through winter here. So there's been a lot of concern about click and collect. Fond du Lac added special license conditions to the alcohol licenses for Pick and Save. So did Madison. Green Bay is doing something similar, and I'm sorry to say there are now 2 bills pending in the state legislature to preempt any community from adding license conditions to click and collect. So if I get information on that, I will share it with Melissa. I was disappointed to see that because I don't think any of the requirements so far have been onerous. They've simply been, you need to be able to see the person and their license, and you need to make certain that they're not intoxicated. Most of the people I know that really, really need click and collect because they've got 2 kids under 3 in safety seats or they have a mobility issue, they're interested in getting paper towels, dish soap, hamburger, and vegetables, right? I asked the VP of Pick and Save what he would do if a car showed up and their online order was 3 cases of Keystone Light and a dozen frozen pizzas. And the person driving was over 21 and everyone else in the car was wearing a high school letter jacket. He said he'd sell to them because it was a legal sale. That's when I decided we needed to have some license conditions and click and collect and look at this more carefully. He's right, it's a legal sale, but it's not a sale that should be made in a community. Communities have been working to make certain high school kids weren't ordering beer in the, yeah. Nice people never had a teenager in their home, I'm absolutely certain. The other thing to remember on this is that any place that's licensed, part of the licensed premises in a Class A, you can also have a tasting event there by law. You are already preempted from doing anything about that. That's why convenience stores and gas stations that sell alcohol can also have an alcohol tasting event. We've been the butt of some very cruel jokes on the national level because of that. I didn't want alcohol tasting events taking place in the parking lot. Pick and Save, Kroger, their parent corporation, promises they won't do it, but I'd feel better if it was a license condition. I just would feel much better about this. And speaking of license and tasting events, you are preempted from forbidding them, but you can regulate them. You could require cordons, you could require the sampling area be away. I tried to get someplace to put it in the frozen food area with the doors open, but nobody was interested in that. They could also require that your child advertising be at least 36 inches off the floor, so you wouldn't have these appealing displays at child height, and also that you'd have a bartender there. The services that do this, there are actually commercial services that arrange tasting events, but they don't require anybody to be a licensed bartender. It would be nice if one person from the community who has been licensed by the city council or village board was there controlling the event. I don't think that's too much to ask. Non-commercial access, that's also where kids begin to drink. Little kids, those 12-year-olds, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Those are the danger years for alcohol, and the easiest place in Wisconsin to get alcohol is in the family fridge right next to the milk, right? Absolutely. People need to realize that when they put that ugly, ugly old refrigerator in the garage and fill it with beer, if it's not locked up, it is a very tempting target for the teenagers in the neighborhood. See, those are stick-on locks. They can go on. They cost about $20 each. They are a substance abuse block grant eligible expense. And in some communities, police have been handing them out in areas around the middle school. Because it's not just parents. I mean, I'm an empty nester now, and I don't think about my alcohol now as much as I did when my son was in my home. And certainly not as much as when I lived across the street from a high school, which is an entirely different story. But in fact, empty nesters, people that don't have kids, people that just have forgotten what it's like to have teenagers around the home, or people that just never fathomed that someone would sneak in their garage and take 2 or 3 beers. That's how middle school kids get alcohol, and we need to secure those locations. A community can limit alcohol advertising, and that's what I'm going back to now. You can limit the, you can enforce this by discouraging alcohol sponsorships for your community events. Your sign code may well limit the portion of alcohol advertising advertising that can cover the windows, and you can prohibit alcohol advertising on public property, like the gift-wrapped city buses in the city of Madison. Wonder why we have an underage drinking problem. We have billboards on our buses. You can enforce the sign code, and I'm asking the question that I was talking to Melissa. Why is Quick Trip advertising alcohol to toddlers? I filled up at the Quick Trip across the street. I saw alcohol advertising on their bollards. Why is Quick Trip advertising that low? That's not my eye height. That's not your eye height, or anyone in this room. It's the toddlers. So what we're doing is wherever we find them, we use our cell phones to take pictures of them. We check the sign codes because these temporary business signs have a very strict limitations on their size and the length of time they can be there. Quick Trip will remove them if they violate the law, okay? I still want to know why Quick Trip is advertising to toddlers, but we can get them off now while we research that weighty issue and find out why. So look and see. If you don't want to deal with it, take a picture when you fill up at Quick Trip or get the milk of the bollard advertising, send it to me, and I'll check your sign code and let you know. We had public health nurses after last week's Wisconsin Public Health Association meeting going home, and I got pictures from Marinette, Pepin, Jefferson, Oregon, and Stoughton. This stuff is everywhere, even when it violates the law. Communities are eliminating alcohol advertising. You probably heard about New York. This isn't even a full list. Philadelphia did it for the first time in 2004, and it's really gone since then. It is not a First Amendment issue. That image, the Michelob ad, that is the image on the bus stops, which were also the bus stops for the school buses. They got a young alderman named Michael Nutter to spend next year working to get alcohol advertising off all city property in Philadelphia. People said he was crazy, that it was, doomed him politically. He went on to happily serve 2 terms as mayor, so it didn't hurt him. And by the time he was done, it passed unanimously, passed the city council. We can do this. We need to build support for enforcement of the minimum legal drinking age. And we need to begin with our organizations, because we are all policymakers somewhere, even if it's within our homes. And we are saying no video games before homework is done. Everybody goes to church on Sunday. We have policies in our home, but a lot of us serve on different community boards. We serve on the vestry or the elders of our church. We may just be on the neighborhood committee for the block party. We can start changing the alcohol environment there. If you're on the summer picnic committee where you work, say, this year, let's cut off the beer tent an hour earlier. Or let's put a fence around it so families that don't want to drink, their kids just don't have to deal with those people out here. I've seen places that limit everybody to 2 or 3 beers. Give them tickets and they have to ask for it. It's not popular the first year, the second year, it works. You can change policy because we're all policymakers in our lives. When we talk about policy, we're not just talking about public policy. We all live our lives with dozens of policies. So in the sphere where you are a policymaker, you have the power to help improve the alcohol environment. And you can create community norms, family-friendly community norms. Too many communities in Wisconsin allow alcohol in every single park. After today, I'm going up to Spooner. I'm going to be talking with some folks from AA. And one of the things that we have noticed is it's hard to be in recovery in Wisconsin. It's really hard. So having a couple of alcohol-free parks, okay, you are not going to have your high school reunion in that park. You're not gonna have somebody's wedding in that park. But a group of people that for whatever reason chose not to drink, health, religion, they would have a place to go where they would not. They would feel comfortable. They would be the norm. It says nice things about your community that you would do that. You provide family-friendly zones at different parks. Even the Lacrosse Oktoberfest has a family-friendly zone now without alcohol for the parade and then at the festival grounds. And then I would also say is if you have an outside employer, encourage them to include screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment in their employee assistance plan. It's a great benefit and it's evidence-based and it catches problems before they get to dependence. The Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project is based at the University of Wisconsin Law School, but as you probably already figured out, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. On my website, that's up here, you can see we have guidelines. We explain issues in ways that for all of us, although municipal attorneys frequently find them useful as well. Feel free, if you've ever got a question, to just pick up the phone and call or send me an email or talk to Melissa about it. If you see a product that you don't like, take a picture of it with your cell phone, send me that, and I'll help you work it out. But you have the ability to improve the alcohol environment. Wausau's showing you a way to start. They've still got a ways to go. But in fact, I depend on Marathon County to really show the progressive face of Wisconsin up in this part of the state. And I'm hoping that you'll continue to do that. We've got a few minutes left. Did anybody have any questions? I threw a lot out there. No, you have facts dripping out of your ears. Okay, well then thank you very much.
Okay, just another reminder, please make sure you fill in your evaluations and leave them. You have plenty of time to fill them out. Make sure you sign in if you didn't sign in. And enjoy your gift of time. Our next meeting is the first Tuesday of August, which is August 6th. I am not sure exactly what our topic's going to be yet. We're working on getting access to some different documentaries that we may be showing a documentary. We may also be looking at showing the documentary The Ripple Effect, which is around suicide and mental health awareness, which is, as we know, directly linked to substance use. So we will be either showing that documentary in August or in October, so sometime around Recovery Month. But one thing I did forget to mention is August 20th, I believe, is the third Thursday in August. We're going to be doing a educational open opportunity for people to learn about our overdose fatality review team that's in the county. So if you want to know kind of what we've been up to and recommendations, a little bit more about the team, that information all goes out through the weekly update. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Grab extra resources if you'd like. There's plenty of copies.